You know, life has a strange way of humbling you. One day, you're the person holding everything together, the roof, the meals, the hearts. And the next day, you realize no one even noticed how much of yourself you gave away. When my son told me he was getting married, I cried tears of joy. I had spent years praying that he would find someone kind, someone who would love him the way I did. He was my only child. My little boy, who used to build castles from cereal boxes and say, "Mom, when I grow up, I'll buy you a big house with a golden kitchen." I smiled back then and said, "I don't need gold, sweetheart. I just need you to visit me when you're grown." That was all I ever wanted. A little bit of love, a little bit of company. But sometimes life gives you lessons instead of promises. My name is Margaret. I'm 70 years old, retired now, and I live in a small house my late husband and I built together 40 years ago. It's the kind of house where every creak in the floorboard tells a story, where every photo frame holds a lifetime. I lost my husband, Robert, 10 years ago. Since then, my son, Evan, has been my world. I used to joke that we grew up together. Him learning how to live, and me learning how to let go. He was a good boy, quiet, gentle, the kind who still hugged me at 28 and said, "Mom, don't ever think you're alone." I believed him, every word. When he met Clara, it felt like light had come back into our lives. She was bright, polite, full of laughter. I remember the first time she came to dinner. She brought flowers and called me Mrs. Margaret with that nervous smile young girls have when they're trying to make a good impression. Robert would have liked her, I thought. After dinner, she helped me wash dishes. When I thanked her, she said, "Oh, it's nothing. You've done enough for us already." At the time, I didn't understand what she meant, but I smiled anyway. They had been dating only 6 months when Evan called me one evening. His voice trembled a little. "Mum, I think she's the one." I laughed softly. "Then you'd better start saving for the wedding." He sighed, half amused, half nervous. "That's the thing, Mum. Clara's family wants something small, intimate, maybe even private." I said, "That's all right, sweetheart. Whatever makes you both happy." I didn't care about how big the wedding was. I just wanted to be there, to see my son take that step. Months passed. Evan was busier than ever. New projects at work, moving in with Clara, planning the future. We still talked, but less often. It was natural, I told myself. Every mother goes through this stage. Then, one afternoon, I called him to ask, "So, when's the big day?" He paused for a moment, and then, in a small voice, he said, "Soon, Mom. I'll tell you everything when it's final." A week later, I went to the supermarket and ran into a neighbor. She congratulated me. "Margaret, you must be so proud. Evan looked so handsome at the ceremony." I blinked. "Ceremony?" She frowned. "Oh dear, I thought you knew. I saw the photos online this morning. The wedding looked beautiful." My heart stopped. I pulled out my phone with trembling hands and searched. And there it was, dozens of pictures. My son, in a grey suit, holding Clara's hand under an arch of white roses. Her family surrounded them, her parents, her siblings, her cousins, everyone smiling, everyone, except me. I don't remember much about that day after that moment. I remember sitting on my couch for hours, staring at those photos until the light faded. I remember whispering, "They forgot me." But deep down, I knew it wasn't a mistake. No one forgets their mother's number on their wedding day. Later that evening, I called Evan. He answered after a few rings. "Hi, Mom," he said softly. I didn't ask why. I just asked when. "When did you get married, Evan?" There was a pause. "Yesterday," he said. "Just something small. We didn't want to make it a big deal." I could hear Clara in the background laughing with someone, and then I heard her voice, distant but clear. "Tell her we only invited special people." I froze. Evan said quickly, "Mom, it's not what you think. We just..." But I couldn't listen anymore. I hung up. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator. On the counter sat a wrapped gift I had bought for their wedding. A silver frame that said, "Forever begins today." It would never hold their photo. I didn't sleep that night. I just kept replaying her words in my mind. Special people. I wasn't special enough. Days turned into weeks. I told myself to be strong, to be understanding, but the silence hurt more than anger ever could. Then, one evening, my phone rang. It was Clara. "Margaret," she said sweetly, "I hope you're doing well. The landlord's been asking about the rent. I think you forgot to make the transfer this month." Her voice was polite, casual, as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't spent nights crying into my pillow. I took a deep breath. "Clara," I said softly, "didn't you say only special people get invited to your life?" There was a pause on the other end. Then she stammered, I didn't mean..." "I know what you meant," I interrupted gently, "and you're right. From now on, I'll only help special people too." And then, for the first time in years, I hung up without apologizing. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter. There were no calls to make, no bills to pay for others, no waiting for gratitude that never came. Just silence. Peaceful, quiet silence. I made myself coffee, strong, the way Robert used to drink it. I stood by the window, watching the rain slide down the glass, and whispered, "Maybe this is what starting over feels like." I went to the bank that afternoon. The clerk looked up and smiled. "Morning, Mrs. Hale." "Yes," I said. "I need to cancel all automatic transfers to my son's account." She raised her eyebrows slightly but nodded. "Of course, ma'am. Are you sure?" I've never been more sure. When she printed the confirmation, I felt as though I had just taken back a part of myself I'd given away years ago. I walked out of that bank, taller, lighter, freer. That night, I got a dozen missed calls from Evan and Clara. Then a message from Evan. "Mum, please answer. We need to talk." But I didn't. Not because I was angry, but because I was finally done. For years, I had confused love with sacrifice. I thought the more I gave, the closer we'd be. But all I had done was teach them that love was something they could withdraw whenever they needed it, like cash from an endless account. That weekend, I went for a walk, the first long walk I'd taken in years. The air felt crisp, the trees bare and honest. I passed the park where I used to take Evan when he was little. I remembered his tiny hands gripping mine, the way he'd laugh when I pushed him on the swing. I sat on that same bench, and for the first time, I didn't cry. I smiled. Because I realized that my love had done its job. It had raised him, fed him, protected him, but it didn't owe him forever. That was the beginning of my new life. Small, quiet, but mine. The week after I stopped sending them money was quiet. Almost too quiet. No calls, no messages, no fake sweet voices asking, "How are you, Margaret?" And for the first time in years, I noticed the sound of my own home again. The kettle whistling, the floor creaking under my slippers, the clock ticking. It was as if my house, my life, was breathing again. I started doing small things I hadn't done in ages. Baking, painting, reading, just living. 3 days later, my phone rang again. It was Evan. I almost didn't answer, but a mother's heart never stops hoping. "Hi, Mom," he said. His voice was tight, hesitant. "Evan," I replied softly. "I was just thinking of you." He paused. We need to talk. Can we come by tomorrow?" I hesitated. "Of course," I said finally. "I'll make lunch." After the call, I stood at my kitchen counter for a long time. Part of me wanted to believe this was reconciliation. The other part, the quieter, wiser part, knew it was about money. Still, I cooked anyway. Old habits die gently. When they arrived, I noticed how different the energy felt. Evan looked uneasy. Clara smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. They sat at the table, barely touching the food. Finally, Clara spoke. "Margaret, the rent's due this week," she said, her tone sugary, but sharp around the edges. "We thought maybe you forgot the transfer." I set down my fork carefully. "No," I said, "I didn't forget." Evan frowned. Then, "Why didn't you send it?" I looked at him. My son, the same boy who once used to hold my hand when crossing the street. "Because," I said quietly, "you're married now. It's time to stand on your own." Clara's smile faltered. Evan's face flushed. "Mum," he said, trying to keep his voice calm, "you know we're still getting settled. You can't just stop helping us like that." "I didn't just stop," I said. "I've been helping for 3 years. I think that's enough." Clara leaned forward. "Margaret, I understand you're upset about the wedding." I held up my hand. "Clara, don't." She blinked. "Don't what?" "Don't pretend this is about the wedding. It's about respect. You both made your choices. Now live with them." Evan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Mum, you're making this harder than it has to be." I smiled sadly. "Evan, you've been saying that since you were 5. Every time I tried to teach you responsibility, it was, 'Mom, you're making this hard.' Maybe it's time you learned that life is hard when you take too much for granted." There was silence. Finally, Clara stood up abruptly. "You know what? We don't need this. We'll figure it out ourselves." Evan followed, avoiding my eyes. At the door, I said softly, "I hope you do." The moment the door shut, I sank into my chair. My hands were trembling, but not from fear, from relief. I had finally stood up for myself. That night, I couldn't sleep, but it wasn't from worry. It was something else. A quiet strength I hadn't felt in years. I whispered into the darkness, "Robert, I think I finally did it. I finally let him grow. Days turned into weeks again. I didn't hear from them for almost a month, but strangely, I didn't miss them the way I thought I would. Instead, I found myself smiling more. I joined a small art class at the community center, met a few lovely people, women my age, all with stories that sounded a little too familiar. One of them, Helen, was painting a sunflower and said, "My daughter hasn't spoken to me in 2 years, but you know what? I sleep better now." We laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was true. There's a strange peace that comes from finally stopping the chase for approval. Then one afternoon, as I was watering my plants, I saw Evan's car pull up. My heart skipped. He got out, alone this time. He stood by the gate for a long moment before walking up to the porch. "Hi, Mom," he said. I opened the door slowly. "Hi, sweetheart. Come in." He looked around the house, everything neat, quiet, just as he remembered. Then he sighed. "Mom, I owe you an apology." I waited. "For the wedding," he said. "I didn't want to hurt you. Clara thought keeping it small would be easier. I should have said something." I nodded slowly. "You should have." He swallowed hard. "I know. And I'm sorry." His eyes were wet, but so were mine. "Evan," I said softly, "I don't need an apology for the wedding. I just needed to know I mattered." He nodded, looking down. Then, quietly, he said, "We're behind on the rent again." And there it was. I smiled faintly. "You know, Evan, I was afraid you'd say that." He looked at me, confused. "Do you remember when you were little?" I said. "And your father and I used to make you earn your allowance by cleaning your room or helping in the garden?" He nodded slowly. "That wasn't because we needed the help," I said. "It was because we wanted you to learn something, that nothing in life is free, but everything in life can be earned." He shifted in his seat, his eyes flickering with shame. "Mom, I promise I'll pay you back this time. Just until..." I held up my hand. "No, sweetheart. You don't need to promise. You just need to start living within your means." He looked hurt. "You don't want to help me anymore." I reached across the table and touched his hand. "I do want to help you, Evan. But not like this. Not by keeping you dependent." He blinked back tears. "I didn't think it mattered to you." I smiled. Everything matters when it's love. When he left that day, I didn't feel broken anymore. I felt balanced. The next week, he didn't call. Nor the week after. Then, one evening, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Clara. Her handwriting was neat, careful. Inside was a short note. "Margaret, I know we haven't been fair to you. I said things I shouldn't have. You've been nothing but kind, and I hope one day you'll forgive me. We're trying to sort things out. Clara." I sat by the window, reading that note over and over. It wasn't a full apology, but it was a start, and sometimes a start is all we need. 2 months later, I was painting in my living room when I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, Clara stood there, visibly pregnant. Her hands were clasped nervously, eyes downcast. "Margaret," she said softly, "may I come in?" I nodded. Of course. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where so many uncomfortable conversations had happened. She looked tired, but sincere. "I wanted to tell you in person," she said. "I'm expecting. Evan wanted to wait to tell you himself, but I needed to say it. I felt tears rise instantly. A baby, she nodded. Yes, you're going to be a grandmother. I reached across and held her hand gently. Clara, I whispered. Thank you for coming. She nodded, eyes glistening. I know I've been awful. I was proud. I wanted to prove I could do everything on my own, but I ended up isolating us from the one person who truly cared. I smiled sadly. It takes courage to admit that. She hesitated. We're trying to fix things. Evan. He's been working extra hours. We even started budgeting. I laughed softly. Imagine that. My son learning about budgets. She laughed too, wiping her eyes. He's terrible at it, but he's trying. There was a moment of silence. Then she said quietly, We're still behind on rent, but I'm not asking for money. I just wanted you to know we're trying. I looked at her and saw sincerity. Real, quiet, human sincerity. Clara, I said, I can't fix everything, but I can make soup, and you both can come eat. Her lips trembled as she nodded. I'd like that. That night, Evan and Clara came for dinner. It was the first time in almost a year that laughter filled my house again. Evan helped me wash dishes. Clara dozed on the couch. For a moment, I forgot the hurt. I forgot the silence, the distance. It was just us. Family again, fragile but real. Before they left, Evan hugged me tightly. Mom, he said softly, thank you for not giving up on us. I smiled into his shoulder. I almost did. But love makes fools of us all. He laughed quietly. You're not a fool, Mom. You're the reason we're still standing. After they left, I stood at the window again, watching their car drive away. The streetlights flickered. The night air felt lighter. And I realized something. Sometimes, letting go doesn't mean walking away. It means waiting until they learn to walk toward you again. The months after that dinner came and went like pages in a quiet book. Clara's belly grew round, her steps slower, her eyes softer. Evan called me every few days now, not to ask for money, but to tell me about the baby's kicks, or the color they'd painted the nursery. I listened, heart full. It felt like the first spring after a long winter, fragile, gentle, and alive again. I spent my days preparing little things for the baby. I sewed blankets, knitted socks, and found the old wooden cradle that Robert had built when Evan was born. It was still sturdy, though the paint had faded. When I touched the wood, memories flooded back. Sleepless nights, soft lullabies, the weight of a baby on my chest. I smiled through tears. This time, it wouldn't be my child in that cradle, but it would still hold my heart. One snowy evening, I got a call at 3 a.m. It was Evan. Mum, it's time, he said breathlessly. We're at the hospital. I didn't even think. I threw on my coat, grabbed my bag, and drove through the falling snow. The roads were empty, glowing under streetlights. It felt like the world was holding its breath. When I arrived, I found Evan pacing the hallway. His hair was messy, his hands shaking. Mom, he said, relief washing over his face. She's inside. I held him tightly. You're going to be a father, sweetheart. He nodded, tears in his eyes. I'm terrified. I smiled. That means you'll do just fine. Hours passed. Finally, A nurse came out smiling. "Congratulations," she said. "It's a girl." Evan froze for a second, then broke into the widest smile I'd ever seen. "A girl," he whispered. I followed him into the room, and there she was, tiny, wrapped in a white blanket, her face red and perfect. Clara looked exhausted but glowing. She glanced at me and said, "Meet your granddaughter, Margaret." I stepped closer, my hands trembling. When I touched that baby's cheek, I felt something inside me heal. Her name was Lila. She blinked, opened her eyes, the same shade of brown as Evan's when he was a baby. I whispered, "Hello, Lila. I'm your grandma." In that instant, all the hurt, all the loneliness, all the years of giving and being forgotten, they disappeared like mist in morning light. For the next few weeks, I practically lived at their apartment, cooking, helping, holding Lila whenever Clara needed rest. Clara, to her credit, never tried to hide her gratitude. One afternoon, while I rocked Lila to sleep, she sat beside me and said quietly, "Margaret, I know I don't deserve your kindness." I looked at her. "You do. Everyone does when they're trying to change." She bit her lip. "You could have turned your back on us." I smiled softly. I almost did. But I remembered what love looks like when it's unconditional, and sometimes that means starting over. She nodded, eyes wet. "Thank you for giving me another chance." And in that small moment, forgiveness became real. Not spoken, not forced, just felt. The days blurred into months. Lila grew fast, chubby cheeks, bright eyes, the sweetest giggle you've ever heard. Every Friday, Evan and Clara would bring her over. We'd sit together, share dinner, talk about work, and watch old movies. It was nothing extraordinary, but to me, it felt like heaven. Evan often said, "Mom, Lila adores you. You're her favorite person." I'd laugh and say, "Don't tell Clara that." But inside, my heart would swell. After years of silence, my home had laughter again. One summer evening, Evan and I sat outside on the porch. Lila was asleep inside. Fireflies floated over the garden, and the air smelled like lavender. He took a deep breath. "Mom, do you ever think about Dad?" "Every day," I said, "especially now. He'd be proud of you." He looked away, blinking hard. "I wish he were here to see her." "He is," I whispered. "Every time she smiles, I see a little of him." Evan nodded, his eyes glistening. "I think about what you said, about learning to stand on my own. You were right. It was hard, but it made me grow up." I reached over, squeezed his hand. "You've always been capable, Evan. You just needed to believe it." He smiled faintly. "I do now." For a while, everything was peaceful, but life, as it often does, found a way to test that peace again. One cold morning in January, Evan called me with a quiet voice. "Mom," he said, "can I come by?" When he arrived, I saw the worry in his eyes. He sat down heavily at the table. "Work's been slow," he said. "We're behind on a few payments." "It's just temporary." I waited, knowing what usually came next, but this time he surprised me. "I'm not asking for money," he said quickly. "I just wanted to tell you. I didn't want to hide things from you again." I stared at him for a moment, then smiled. "That's very grown of you," I said. He exhaled, shoulders relaxing. It feels strange, Mom, not running to you every time something goes wrong. I laughed gently. That's how adulthood feels, sweetheart. Uncomfortable, but freeing. He chuckled. You're right. And for the first time, I saw in his face not the boy I raised, but the man I had hoped he'd become. Later that night, after he'd gone, I sat by the fireplace, thinking about how far we'd come. 3 years ago, he had forgotten me on his wedding day. Now, he was learning how to be a husband, a father, and a son again. On his own terms, I realized something then. Maybe love isn't about being needed. Maybe it's about being remembered. And he had remembered. A few months later, on my birthday, Evan and Clara surprised me with a little party. Just the 3 of them. And a cake Lila had decorated herself, with too many sprinkles. Clara hugged me tightly and whispered, "You're the heart of this family, Margaret." I smiled. "No, darling. I'm just the roots. The heart belongs to all of you." That night, Evan raised his glass. "To my mother," he said softly, "who taught me that love doesn't mean paying every bill. It means showing up, even when it's hard." I couldn't speak. Tears rolled down my cheeks as I whispered, "That's all I ever wanted, Evan. Just for you to understand." He nodded. "I do now." After they left, I sat alone in the quiet glow of the candles. For years, I had prayed for things to go back to how they were, but now I realized I didn't want the old anymore. I wanted real, and what we had now, honesty, respect, care, that was real. The seasons turned again. Spring returned. Lila was walking, babbling, calling me Gamma. One afternoon, as we played in the garden, she looked up and said, "Gamma, you happy?" I froze, surprised by the question. I smiled. "Yes, sweetheart. I am, and I meant it. For the first time in years, I wasn't pretending." That night, I wrote in my journal, "Happiness doesn't always come with celebration. Sometimes it comes with quiet mornings, shared soup, and the laughter of a child who doesn't know you were once lonely." I closed the book, exhaled, and whispered, "Thank you, life, for letting me start again." The months rolled by like calm waves. The house no longer felt heavy. It felt alive. Every Friday evening, the doorbell would ring, and there they were, Evan, Clara, and little Lila, carrying laughter with them like sunlight in their hands. I began to notice how natural everything felt again. No forced smiles, no guilt hiding in the corners of our words. Just family. Clara often came early to help me cook. She would chop vegetables while humming lullabies. Sometimes she'd pause and ask about recipes. "Margaret, how do you make your stew so thick?" I'd laugh and tell her, "Patience. That's the main ingredient." And somehow, we both knew that word meant more than soup. One afternoon, she said, "I still think about how I treated you." I shook my head gently. "Don't stay there, Clara. We've already crossed that bridge." She smiled. "I know, but thank you for waiting on the other side." Her words stayed with me all evening. Forgiveness, I realized, doesn't arrive with fireworks. It comes quietly, like twilight, until one day you realize it's been there all along. Evan changed too. He had grown steady, thoughtful, protective of his little family. He no longer looked like the boy who hid behind excuses. He looked like the man Robert and I had hoped he'd become. One night, as we tucked Lila into bed, he whispered. Mom, you know what's funny? You used to rescue me every time I stumbled. Now, when I trip, I hear your voice in my head saying, "Get up, Evan. You can do this." I laughed softly. That's good. That means I'm haunting you already. He grinned, the best kind of ghost. The next few years passed peacefully. Evan opened his own small design firm. Clara started teaching art classes at the local school. And Lila, my sweet Lila, grew into a bundle of energy with paint-stained hands and endless questions. Every weekend she'd ask, "Gamma, can we bake cookies?" And even when I was tired, I'd nod. Because I knew childhood runs fast. Love shouldn't wait. Then came a quiet winter that reminded me of old days. Snow piled on the porch, and the world slowed again. Evan called one evening. "Mom, can we come by tomorrow? We have news." When they arrived, they looked nervous. Clara held Lila's hand tightly. Evan said, "Mom, the company lost a big contract. Money will be tight for a while." I waited for the familiar request. But instead he said, "We're not asking for help. We just wanted to keep you in the loop." I blinked, surprised, then smiled. That's all I ever wanted, Evan. To be in the loop, not the lifeline. He exhaled, relief softening his shoulders. Feels strange to tell you bad news without expecting you to fix it. Strange is good, I said. It means you're growing. Later that night, as I sat by the fire, I thought about that conversation. How years ago, that same moment would have been filled with fear, anger, or begging. Now it was filled with honesty. That's what healing looks like. Conversation without blame. I realized then that love matures, just like people do. It begins as dependency, grows through mistakes, and settles into mutual respect. It had taken us decades, but we finally arrived there. I began writing small letters again, not the kind that beg or explain, but the kind that remember. Each week I'd write to Robert in my notebook. "We did it, love. He's learning. Our boy is kind again." And the house is full of laughter. I'd close the notebook, whisper goodnight, and feel at peace. One evening, Clara came alone, carrying a folder. "Margaret," she said, "we wanted to show you something." Inside were drawings, plans for a small house they were saving to build one day. Nothing grand, just cozy and bright, with a big kitchen and a garden for Lila. "We'll name it after Dad," Evan said later. "The Robert Hale home. A place built with love." I touched the paper gently. "Your father would have loved that," I whispered. They smiled. And in that moment, I saw how the cycle had changed. From asking to giving. From forgetting to honoring. The years continued kindly. By Lila's 5th birthday, our bond had become unbreakable. She'd run into my arms shouting, "Gamma, story time." And I'd tell her stories about when her daddy was small. How he once tried to bake cookies with mud. How he built a kite bigger than himself. She'd laugh so hard, her tiny shoulders would shake. Then she'd fall asleep beside me, clutching my hand. Each time I looked at her sleeping face, I'd whisper, "Thank you for bringing my family back." Because truly, she had. But life, as always, reminds you of endings too. One autumn morning, I woke up and realized my steps had slowed. My hands trembled a little when I painted. The doctor called it just age. But to me, it was a signal. A gentle whisper, that it was time to pass the torch. So I began to write letters for Lila. One for her 16th birthday, one for her wedding, and one for the day she'd have a child of her own. Each started with the same words: love without losing yourself, because that was the lesson I had waited a lifetime to learn. Now, evenings are my favorite time. I sit by the window with tea, watch the lights flicker in Evan's house down the road. Sometimes I see them in the yard, Evan lifting Lila high into the air while Clara laughs beside them. And I smile, knowing the story has come full circle. Once, I was the mother who gave everything until she had nothing left. Now I'm the mother who gives peace, and keeps a little for herself too. If you had told me years ago that my greatest heartbreak would become my greatest peace, I wouldn't have believed you. But it's true. Pain refines you. It turns bitterness into wisdom, dependence into strength, and loss into clarity. The woman who once sat crying by the phone is gone. In her place stands someone softer, wiser, someone who understands that love isn't measured by how long people stay, but by how well you let them go and still love them from afar. Tonight, as I blow out the candle, I whisper a little prayer. Thank you for teaching me that boundaries are not walls, they're doors with locks of respect. And thank you for sending me back the love I once feared I had lost. Then I smile to myself and say softly, "Good night, Robert. Good night, Evan. Good night, world." And the house answers with silence, the gentle, peaceful kind that holds no loneliness, only rest. You know, I used to think stories always ended with grand goodbyes or sudden tears, but I learned that most endings come quietly, like dusk settling on an old street, or the sigh after a long day. Now, when I sit by my window, I see that same maple tree I've watched for 40 years. It's older, like me, but still blooming every spring. Maybe that's what life is, a series of seasons that teach us how to begin again. I often wonder how many mothers sit in rooms like mine, waiting for a phone call, holding on to memories that no longer fit their hands. If you're one of them, I hope my story finds you. Because what I've learned is simple, and it might ease your heart too. Love doesn't disappear when people leave. It only changes its address. There was a time when I thought I had lost everything. My son, my purpose, my worth. But loss was only love moving into a new shape. It turned into strength, then forgiveness, then peace. Evan still visits every week. Sometimes he brings work papers, sometimes just silence. We sit together, and that's enough. He tells me about Lila's new drawings, or how Clara burned the toast again, and we laugh until our sides ache. Those small, ordinary moments are the treasures I once chased through pain. Now they come freely, because I finally stopped begging for them. One afternoon, I asked Lila what she wanted to be when she grows up. She said, "I want to make people happy." And I smiled. "Then start by being kind to yourself first." She nodded like she understood. Maybe she really did. Children feel truth long before they can explain it. Sometimes, late at night, I talk to Robert as if he's still here. I tell him about our family, about how our boy finally learned to stand, about how our granddaughter laughs like he used to. And in that quiet, I can almost hear him answer, "You did well, Margaret. You finally learned to let them fly." I smile, whispering back, "Yes, love." And they came home. If you're listening to my voice right now, remember this. You can give endlessly, but if you forget yourself in the giving, you'll end up empty. Love needs balance. It needs room to breathe. The ones who truly love you will return, not for what you have, but for who you are, and those who don't will teach you how to love yourself better. That's not bitterness. That's wisdom dressed in kindness. Today, I wrote my final letter in the notebook I keep for Robert. It simply says, "We did it." The pain turned into peace. The house is quiet, but my heart is not. It beats with gratitude. I closed the book, smiled, and placed it on the shelf beside his photograph. No tears, no longing, just thanks. Life will always test you. It will take what you think you can't live without, then give you something softer, wiser, quieter in return. That's its way of teaching you the shape of your own strength. So when love hurts, let it teach you. When people forget you, remember yourself. And when the world grows silent, fill it with your own gentle laughter. Tomorrow, Lila will come over again. We'll bake, we'll sing, and she'll probably spill flour everywhere. And while she laughs, I'll whisper a silent prayer that she never has to learn love the hard way. But if she ever does, I hope she remembers her grandmother's story. A story not of sadness, but of courage. A story that says, you can be broken and still beautiful. You can be forgotten and still full of love. You can lose everything and still find peace. So this is where my story ends. In a small house with a heart finally light and a world that feels kind again. If you take one thing from it, let it be this. Love is not about holding on tighter. It's about opening your hands and trusting that what's meant to stay will stay. And what leaves to make space for peace.